Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will be in Texas today to unveil his border security policy. It's his first major campaign platform reveal since announcing his 2024 bid for the White House. And this comes as Republican presidential frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, was honored as Man of the Decade at a GOP event in Michigan Sunday. During his speech, Trump called President Biden a, quote, catastrophe for Michigan. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa is following all the latest from Washington. Hey, Robert, it's always good to see you. What else did Donald Trump say last night that stood out to you?
Good to be with you, Anne-Marie. It was not only about what former President Trump had to say, it was about where he was. To be in Michigan, this key battleground state, in an area of the state that has flipped between Democrat and Republican over the past decade, it's evident that he's looking at Michigan, should he become the Republican nominee, to make sure that that's a state, alongside Pennsylvania and others, that are going to be really crucial in the 2024 general election. Still a long way to go before Trump is the Republican nominee, should he actually win the nomination. And many rivals are coming up the side, trying to make their own case. But Trump's message was essentially that the establishment, in his view, the political establishment, the legal establishment, are coming after him. So he unfurled many grievances, some we've heard before from him on the campaign trail, but he's casting himself to Republican voters as someone who is a victim of a political and legal establishment, hoping that in some way his allies tell CBS News that that identifies with Republican voters who feel grievances in their own life.
So in other words, much of what we've already heard from him on the campaign trail.
And he's trying to appeal specifically to conservatives as well on policy to make sure he doesn't get flanked on his right from any of his competitors.
So speaking of a competitor, Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to reveal his border security policy today in Texas. I was wondering when any of these candidates were going to actually pivot to what they can do for America versus what everyone else is not. So what are we hearing about this policy?
Governor DeSantis has been talking about immigration for a long time. So have essentially every candidate in the So has every candidate in the Republican field. What DeSantis' speech today is going to be worth watching for is how he frames President Biden's record on immigration. For a long time, DeSantis' aides and allies have been telling us that DeSantis has been touting what he's done in Florida, talking about his record on immigration, some of it very controversial in terms of how he's handled migrants, shipping them out of the state, which has raised legal and political questions, conduct questions about the Florida governor, and character questions. But he believes, we're told by his allies, that this appeals to Republican voters. But he wants to not just talk about Florida anymore. So this speech today is about taking the next step politically and targeting the policies of President Biden and trying to cast himself as someone who is, just like Trump, able to be a general election candidate against the presumptive Democratic nominee and incumbent president.
Okay, pivoting to another GOP hopeful. Speaking at the Faith and Freedom Gala over the weekend, Donald Trump told attendees that he was being indicted for you. We've heard him say this before. They're not coming after me. They're coming after you, but they're doing it through me, that kind of language. So fellow GOP rival and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie responded to that on ABC News. I want to play some of that sound.
I don't know how it benefited the American people for him to take highly sensitive intelligence and secret documents out of the White House, to stonewall the government on returning them for over a year and a half, to subject himself to a raid by the FBI, even though they had asked him voluntarily to return this stuff, and to then be subject to an indictment, which is obviously going to be one of great trouble for the country, because no one wants to see this happen. Donald Trump says that's for us. I mean, it's absurd.
So, Chris Christie isn't the lone voice being critical of President Trump, though he certainly made that kind of a defining thing for his campaign. But I wonder, in light of, Ron DeSantis choosing to sort of focus on the border, Chris Christie being critical of the president, are we kind of seeing candidates move away from Donald Trump, distance themselves a bit?
They're all trying to create their own momentum ahead of the first Republican primary debate in August. And they know that there's a bit of a fragile political moment here for them to maybe have an opportunity to create a new dynamic. And they look at not only Trump's legal trouble, but they look at Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and wonder if he's not gaining enormous traction in the polls, that maybe someone like Chris Christie can find his way up. Christie's focusing on New Hampshire, but there are others in the race, like South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, really saying to voters he's a traditional Republican, a conservative. And you have those who have just entered late, like Will Hurd, the former Texas Congressman, Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami. They all believe that if DeSantis hasn't established himself yet as the Trump alternative, then maybe they can, over the next few months, maybe spark a little fundraising and political discussion inside the Republican Party.
So pivoting over to former Vice President Mike Pence, he's calling on other GOP presidential candidates to support his call for a national ban on abortion around 15 weeks of pregnancy. Here's what he had to say on Fox News this weekend.
I did this week call on every other candidate for the Republican nomination to support a minimum standard of a 15-week ban on abortion at the national level. That would align American law with most of the countries in Europe that literally ban abortion after 12 to 15 weeks. Our laws at the national level today are more aligned with North Korea, China, and Iran than with other Western countries in Europe.
So I'm sort of curious about the strategy here. You know, you've seen poll after poll after poll that suggests that that is actually not what the American public population actually wants. So what is this about just kind of making it out of the early states where you might have a strong evangelical showing? Is it about creating an issue that it makes him distinctive from the other candidates? What is Mike Pence doing?
Well, he's trying to play big in Iowa because if he's going to survive in the Republican nomination contest, he needs to win there or do well there. So that could propel him further in the race. And to win in Iowa, you look at past victors in Iowa like Senator Ted Cruz, people who've done well, former Senator Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee. They've always taken pretty hardline stances in terms of a conservative policy on abortion rights, opposing abortion rights. And Pence, what he's doing with talking about a federal abortion ban is trying to get to the right of Trump, who has not articulated that explicitly as a policy position. But Trump has been saying to evangelical voters and religious voters, like he did over the weekend, that even if he's not going to take that formal stance alongside Pence, that he is the president who nominated judges and Supreme Court justices who ultimately did much to erode abortion rights, and those justices helped to overturn Roe v. Wade. And because of that, he wants those religious voters to stick with him, regardless if Pence is officially taking a more conservative position on opposing abortion rights.
All right. Robert Costa, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.